and there's been a little shuffling at the last minute. But so quickly, you know, basically this is, again, it's intended for newcomers to the field, people who are confused what's the difference between ecological and environmental economics. It's the E4A program. But you know, ecological economics really still is an emerging field. So there's a general agreement on the foundations, but a lack of consensus on what that actually means, what our research agenda should be, how we should progress. It's science-based and values-driven. We explicitly acknowledge normative values. I mean, this is economics. We're talking about desirable ends. We're talking about what we, you know, how we want to use our resources. Ecological sustainability and just distribution on a finite planet. So, to begin with, we're focusing on the biophysical system, and this is the finite planet that sustains our economy. So, this is the core principle of an ecological economics worldview: is that the economy is embedded within a global ecosystem and integrally, inseparably embedded. And all matter that feeds the economy comes from nature. All energy comes from solar energy or fossil fuels or stocks of fuels. And you know, the matter enters the economy, is transformed into economic services, and returns to the ecosystem as waste, some of which can be cycled. Energy fuels the entire economic process. Returns to the ecosystem is waste heat and particles and gases that can't be recycled. And the economy generates this flux of economic services, the ecosystem a flux of ecological benefits that contribute to human welfare. And as the economy, so this depicts, you know, a small economy and a fairly large world. The economy, per capita consumption has increased 9-fold in the last 100 years. Population has quadrupled. So the scale of the economy relative to the ecosystem that sustains it has increased about 36-fold over the past 100 years. And it doesn't expand into a void, it expands into a finite planet. And so as the economy grows, it displaces ecological ecosystems, displaces the rest of nature. We get a larger flux of economic welfare, but a much smaller flux of benefits, life-sustaining functions of global ecosystems. And that's a serious challenge. So that's the core principle. We start from the laws of physics. Very simply, you can't make nothing from something. Everything the economy produces is a physical transformation of raw materials. The only source of those raw materials is nature. You also can't make nothing from something. So once the economy uses energy to create things that break down, wear out, fall apart, return to nature is waste. And this is always the process. And the planet provides all raw materials and absorbs all waste. You also can't do work without energy. So we have two sources of energy. A flow of solar energy from a flow of solar energy that comes at a fixed rate over time, or stocks of fossil fuels we can consume as fast as we want. Those are our two sources of energy. And it's the second law of thermodynamics that entropy always increases. Economists, we talk about disorder. So some physicists and experts in thermodynamics say that ecological economists misuse the concept of thermodynamics. But what we mean is that disorder increases. You can't burn the same match twice. You can't burn the same barrel of oil twice. When you burn that barrel of oil, you create disordered particulate matter, gases, and waste heat that can't be reused. Really quickly, there's another big controversy over thermodynamics. So mainstream thermodynamics actually believes that all reactions are reversible, and in fact, almost everything in the universe is reversible. So, which means that we live in a deterministic universe as well. If we knew the position and velocity of every particle in the universe, we would know all future and all past. And this seems like a radical idea. There's a deterministic system. But this is a quote from Einstein that he wrote to an Indian poet, in which he says, if the moon in the act of completing its internal way around the earth were gifted with self-consciousness, it would feel thoroughly convinced that it was traveling away of its own accord. So would a being endowed with higher insight and more perfect intelligence, watching man and his doings, smile about man's illusion that he was acting according to his own free will. So there is this dominant view in physics that we live in a deterministic world, and we have this illusion of free will. There is, on the other hand, another view of far from equilibrium thermodynamics, which is fundamentally different, which means we live with inherent uncertainty and novelty, and evolutionary change occurs, so this is a big schism within thermodynamics. Ecological economists tend to latch onto this view of pure uncertainty, and that's just a little bit of an aside, but just to be clear that there are controversies over the ways ecological economists talk about thermodynamics that physicists might disagree with. But you can think of it as a metaphor. So anyway, these raw materials, we also pay attention to the laws of physics and the laws of ecology. And the raw materials that we use are the structural building blocks of ecosystems. So all those raw materials we transform into economic products are alternatively structural building blocks used for ecosystems physically transformed. We can chop down forests as fast as we want, physically transform them into timber, into furniture, all these houses. We have stocks of raw materials we can just take from the earth at the rate we choose and physically transform into economic products. You take a particular configuration of the raw materials and water and minerals that form an ecosystem. A particular configuration creates this ecosystem that has these ecological functions, life-sustaining functions that are quite different. When you have a forested watershed that filters water, purifies water, sequesters carbon, it is not physically transformed into something else. It does this at a rate over time, provides this flux of benefits or ecological functions at a rate over time. So it's a fundamentally different thing. Raw materials and what we could call ecosystem services or life-sustaining functions have fundamentally different characteristics. They're units. The unit here is number of houses you can build from a tree. The unit here is the rate at which forests can reproduce new timber. So rate over time versus physical units, very different. So the laws of ecology, when we extract those raw materials and return waste to the ecosystem, we physically change that ecosystem. We degrade its capacity to provide these life-sustaining functions, including its capacity to reproduce. Waste emissions and resource extraction, and this just shows these kind of lousy lighting, but this is the tar sands, transforming this ecosystem into this system, completely degrading those ecological functions. And the point is that all economic production does that. So there's economically relevant characteristics we want to talk about. So all these resources, our resources physically transformed into what's produced. Timber is physically transformed into a house. A forest is not physically transformed into the ecological functions and benefits it provides. Can humans decide at what rate the resource can be used? So one thing, this little illustration I have, this apple is physically transformed when you consume it. This picture is not. This picture is, it conveys information, it provides, so the apple would be physically transformed, the image, the knowledge there is not. We decide at what rate to use the apples, but we can't decide at what rate a tree produces new apples. That's determined by nature. Other big question in economics is the competition for use. It shows here two people competing for the resource of an apple, but in reality, it's an abundant resource. If this person takes that one, that person takes that one, there's enough for everybody to meet their needs with no competition. So a resource is abundant when there's enough for everybody and we're not competing for use. Scarce is when there's not enough to go around. There's this idea that economists, there's this big distinction between resource characteristics. Does my use leave less for others? I drink some of this water, it leaves less for others. Information, we now live in the information economy. Everybody talks about that. My use of information, if more seats were filled, it would not leave less information for those of you here. You're not competing for it. It's a resource for which there's no competition. In which case, using prices and markets to ration access is inherently inefficient. You're depriving people of something that's not depleted through use, and it's just kind of a foolish thing to do. So another really important issue is whether costs and benefits are shared or suffered and captured by individuals. So when I burn fossil fuels, do I pay the cost or does everybody? So these are relevant characteristics that we have to think about in economics to decide how to allocate. Another really important point is that the ecological economy is a complex, evolving system, continually changing, very complex. What this means is that we have positive and negative feedback loops. A causes B, which dampens A, or A causes B, which increases A, which increases B. You have both types of feedback loops are prevalent. We get chaotic behavior with extreme sensitivity to initial conditions. Small changes can lead to huge differences in outcomes. So we have really highly nonlinear, unpredictable change. And so most things that matter are complete novelties that can't be predicted on the basis of existing knowledge. It's when Lena was asking us to was asking us to imagine a medieval European explaining Europe today. There was no basis on which to do that. The information did not exist then to predict that future. And this is and there's also big time lags involved. So it's a very complex system. A couple more things about this. We really do face these unpredictable evolutionary changes both in technology. We might get some new technology that has a breakthrough impact on our relation with the planet, or we might have some ecological evolutionary change, catastrophic potentially, that has profound impacts. And this is one of the things, mainstream economics is all built on mathematics. Mathematics is a tautology. Everything in mathematics derives from the axioms. There is no novelty, no emergent phenomena really possible. Everything is in those original equations. Is economics a system in which there is no emergent novelty, or is it one that we can use math to describe the whole system? That's a very, very important point. Other really quick point, because I want to turn this over to other people, is the social sciences are very different. Natural scientists, my theory about thermodynamics doesn't change how the world works. My theories about how chemical equations don't change how the world works. My theories as an economist can change how the world works. If Janet Yellen and all the leaders of the central banks around the world said, we foresee a major crisis in the stock market, it's going to collapse next week, everybody would take their money out of the stock market, it would collapse next week. It'd be a self-fulfilling prophecy. You could also have, in my dream, as an ecological economist, is the opposite. I would love to be an anti-Cassandra. I would love to have everybody believe what I say about these threats we face, take action to address those threats, and thereby nullify and prevent those things from happening that I predicted. So people would believe that, or the ecological economists were right, and they would act, stop those things from happening, and then future generations would look at us as a bunch of morons who didn't know what the hell was going on, which is, I actually think, happens with the financial sector. When we regulated the financial sector for 50 years, everybody said, oh, financial sector doesn't need regulation, let's deregulate. But anyway, so finally, this is just, I think another part of the ecological economics worldview, this is a quote from Aldo Leopold, an ecologist, the last word in ignorance is the man who says of an animal or plant, what good is it? If the land mechanism as a whole is good, then every part is good, whether we understand it or not. And we do not understand how the complex system functions. So how can we remove parts from that system the way we do? It says, if the biota in the course of eons has built something we like but do not understand, then who would a fool would discard seemingly useless parts? To keep every cog and wheel is the first precaution of intelligent tinkering. So you've probably all seen that. And just really quickly, emerging from this is these goals of ecologically sustainable scale, socially just distribution, efficient allocation, which we define as entropic thrift. So efficiency is a very bizarre notion in mainstream economics. I'll be talking about that in another presentation later. But entropic thrift is providing a good quality of life at a minimum ecological cost. Let's use the fewest resources possible from our finite planet to provide a good life for people and other animals. That's entropic thrift. And very quickly, the last slide, I want to talk about what are some of the implications of this for economics. So mainstream economics, the goal is ever increasing, exponential growth. And if we live on a finite planet, that is absolutely an absurd goal. It simply cannot, go to another planet and grow all you want, but on this one, we got to stop. In economics, it's all about Pareto efficiency, which means how do we increase the welfare for at least one person without harming anybody else? And we look for Pareto efficient allocations. If we believe in ecological economics, that every economic act requires the transformation of raw materials and the use of energy, which degrades ecosystems, and that affects everybody, this is a totally irrelevant criteria, because there is no way we can have, everything is Pareto incomparable. Every economic act has negative impacts on some and helps others. and there's no way around that. Another issue is marginal analysis. So if you believe in the planetary boundaries, we're having non-marginal impacts. You know, climate change, that's not marginal impacts, that's massive disruption of the Earth system. Biodiversity loss is the same, acidification of the ocean. All of these things have profound impacts that can fundamentally change the whole nature of the system, and marginal analysis is small changes with no thresholds. Maybe that's not a very useful tool. Another big issue is if we do live in a complex system with numerous feedback loops, mainstream economics argues that the price mechanism is the only thing necessary to drive the system to a general equilibrium, which is optimal. There is no complex system which will be driven to equilibrium by a single feedback loop. I mean, there are many, many, many feedback loops. And, you know, ecological feedback loops we need to think about, social feedback loops. The idea that just one feedback loop is enough is absurd. Another big thing, there's a big issue now in ecological economics about valuation. Valuation is all based on willingness to pay, preferences weighted by purchasing power. If you put a monetary value on an ecosystem using any of the dominant methods out there, you are weighting people's preferences by their income. You're saying if you're poor, you don't matter. We only care what your views are if you're rich. That seems to contradict fundamental goals in ecological economics of social, of just distribution. And I won't actually worry about this last one because I want to turn it over, but maybe anthropocentric is ecocentric. The idea that, you know, there's this big debate, should we be ecocentric or anthropocentric? If you buy the ecological economics worldview, humans depend entirely upon the ecosystems in which they're embedded. There are no policy differences. If we say nature matters for itself and people don't matter at all, or if we say, you know, people matter and nature doesn't matter, it's the same policy implications because we can't survive without nature. So, so that I hope is I hope I didn't take up too much time. We started a few minutes late. I think it was a little under 20. So I will now turn over to Allison, who is going to talk about ecosystem